No wind. No tornadoes.
Yeah,
That's a
What about you, Jonathan?
it's been windy. It's been like monsoons with no rain or clouds. All right. Howdy, everybody.
Hello.
good morning again.
We got howdy, Penelope, Vitali, Landon, Sabbath Year,
Good morning.
a fire of Yah, Lori. Did I say Vitali already? Jasmine, Lori, again. All right. So that was like you guys were just saying. There's a lot to unpack in this one, isn't there?
Yep.
So I don't think we're really gonna. Well, I guess we'll just go with it, whatever we get. So let's go ahead and pray in to the discussion. Heavenly Father, thank you very much for this opportunity to study your word together and to fellowship with one another, and to be together in your loving arms. And we thank you for that. Please guide us as we discuss your word, and let eyes be opened and ears be opened. Eyes see and ears hear. We thank you for that. And we also want to thank you for new life that's with us this week. We ask that you bless the households where children have been born and make your will and presence known. Thank you. In Jesus Yeshua's name, amen. All right. Looking at the chat, what are they on?
I think it's just still saying hi.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the chat today. It's great.
Yeah.
All right. So there wasn't much in Genesis chapter 1, was there? Can we just skip that? Yeah. Okay.
We could spend the next year just on that.
Yeah.
Hi, Jimmy's daughter and son. Look at that.
So,
Jimmy
buddy.
showed up.
Isn't there a new baby in that house?
There is. That's why we said daughter and son.
Yay.
Okay. What are we doing? We got, well, let's just kind of throw it out there. I'm not going to go verse by verse on this. What do y'all get from this? Anybody have anything new going through Genesis 1?
I don't know if anybody's ever. I had a friend of mine that had a theory that it's when it says that God created light, that could have possibly been the enemy before the fall, because the light sat above God as everyone was worshiping, and it just made me think about that, because he was up there shining down, and he saw that all that worshiping God and said, "They're not worshiping him; they're worshiping me." That was before the fall, and it made me think of that. I've been thinking about worship music a lot lately, and some old performers that I knew, and I don't know, it was something that was fresh in my mind, because I was thinking about like when singing, it's a little bit more reverent to be turned towards the, not, I don't know, but anyway, it's just something that popped up in my head as we were reading it.
Interesting.
I guess my thing is, he says, "Let there be light," but then he hasn't actually created the sun and the moon yet,
Or the stars.
or the stars. So, but there's light and there's dark. So
Yep.
his radiance would be light and would be able to fill the whole earth. So where is the dark?
In the previous chat, I think it was Sabbath Year that said, so even before the sun, moon, and stars, there was night and day.
Yeah, that's it. That just sits there and you go, okay, how?
Well, is that a reflection? Is that a shadow of what's to come in the eternity? When it says there shall be no more sun nor moon, but only the light of our King shining out of his throne room.
Mhm.
Well, I think we are. I forget what the word is I'm looking for. Like we can't think through it. Like I've heard. I don't know if it's written in the Bible. I don't think, but I've heard a bunch of theories of like those around Noah's day couldn't comprehend what rain would be, or like because it hadn't. So I think that kind of goes back to we have a hard time comprehending a light source or a light and dark without a source or an absence of the source, and just because we don't live that sort of experience. But I think that kind of ties into the same idea of them not being able to comprehend what rain was because it never happened before. They just, it's kind of hard for us to picture. But it could also go to what you were saying about eternity as well.
Anyone else?
Where was it? Is it in Jasher or Jubilees? Or somebody was telling me about the flood, that the Father had apparently already brought a small flood previously. And I don't remember where it was. I probably shouldn't even bring it up unless I have my reference. But it as sort of kind of a warning. I don't remember where it was. I could have dreamt that too. So.
Well, I don't have any proof that they didn't know what rain was. I'm kind of going off of what I've been told over and over as well. So, it's just I've heard it so much. I don't know.
It does seem to be inferred, though, that there wasn't. You got to imagine. Well, too. Well, that's a little later, but in fact, we haven't even touched on it today. But when the flood started, it started with the fountains of the deep breaking open. Right. So you can imagine what that was like, huh? Kind of like a water main, when a water main breaks, except like continent wide.
Well, in my theory on that, it's talked about, is it 9 where he talks about let the dry land appear, that it was in one place. And so when the deep broke up, that split the continents.
Well, was the let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
Let the dry land appear. Was it wet land underwater before that? Okay, and while we're on the subject, it doesn't say anything about water being created.
Ah, good point.
True.
So was water part of the void?
Huh.
I don't know. Has water always been?
Let the waters under heaven be gathered together in one place.
I'd never seen that. That's
Well, even before that, right?
It was already existed. It separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above, so they were already there. If you just take it at this translation and how it's written out.
Right. Well, verse 1, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And I'm sorry, verse 2. And verse 2 in the King James.
Right.
Same thing, the last clause there, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters.
Well, isn't that sort of kind of where some people get the theory that the earth actually existed before in some form, and that it then became without form and void?
Right. That word was right there.
Uh-huh.
And the word, and the earth was without form and void. That in the Strong's is, let's see here. Excuse me, is Hebrew 1961. Haya, not yeehaw, but haya, a primitive root to exist, that is to be or become or come to pass. And then it has a whole bunch of other things that it could be connected to.
Hmm.
So a lot of people, what they do is they say that the earth was here, and that when we're learning about Satan's fall, that is, I forget I think it's the Greek, the catapult, the earth was destroyed and became without form and void. And then it goes to a lot of other things too, like later in the chapter, replenish the waters, replenish the heavens, replenish the earth.
Right.
Doesn't say plenish.
Doesn't say fill, it says replenish.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it there, either it's something we don't need to know right now, or it's a very bad translation. But I have a feeling it's more our understanding that's lacking.
I was just thinking the other day about our understanding of things, and we live in such a rational society. We grew up in it, and so we think we understand the things that God's made because terminology's been applied to it, and so we think we have a grasp of it. But I think a lot of things are still really spiritual, and just because there's terminology applied to it doesn't mean that we know it.
Yep, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Howdy, Casey. I haven't seen you in ages. Howdy, Ben. Howdy, Rebecca. Goodness, all these people. Wow, well, we've made it up to verse 2. Okay. Something that, because I said we would just kind of toss out everything in chapter 1 as we're discussing it. But this, I've thought about this a little bit before. Way down at the end of the chapter, in the ESV, it's in verse 29, and God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food."
I noticed that too.
Whereas the old King James is, and God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth wherein there is life. I have given every green herb for meat." So it's kind of interesting. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that our food sources at first were very specific because bodies had not been corrupted, the earth had not been corrupted, and so those were sustainable in their pure form.
What was sustainable in pure form? The food source or the people?
Yeah, the food source, because eventually somehow we ended up with food that were plants that were not seed bearing. Not every plant that we eat, I think, is seed bearing. Is it?
then are we supposed to eat it?
Well, there's a difference between what was perfect in Genesis and then what was allowed after flood.
Well, but look at it this way. Look at how much effort they put into making and creating a hybrid that doesn't have seeds, like watermelon, seedless watermelon or seedless oranges. And should we even eat it then? I mean, then flip it over yet again. Look at all the nutritional supplements of like grape seed oil, rape seed oil, lemon seed oil, all these seed oils that are supposedly this like super concentrated nutrient.
Well, then you think about the seed is where the life is.
That too.
So that would make sense.
I agree, and I don't eat mushrooms either. Don't get me started. And I know there's people out there that say, no, it's the exact same thing. A spore is a seed. I disagree. It doesn't grow on a tree. I mean, it grows on a tree, but it's not of the tree bearing its own kind of seed. A mushroom or a fungi. Landon's a fun guy, but I'm trying to. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say because I didn't notice that until we read it this time about saying green plant for food, but the way my thought process sort of goes is like that was before corrupted flesh. And I think we had a much more, I mean, even in the past, we had a more of a relationship of human to animal, you know, whereas now we just go grab it at the store. But something I just kind of feel like the after the fall and sort of a disconnection between harmony and nature. It may not, there are people out there that don't eat meat at all. It's not that we necessarily need it, but it's just that like we're different now, and maybe that's why it's not the way that it was supposed to be, because because of the fall.
I don't think it was supposed to be that way, and it actually, I think if I remember correctly, meat animals were not given as food until after the flood.
Genesis 9.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when it says meat, that just means food.
Right. Well, that's interesting too, because once you get up into the handing down of the law, the meat offerings, all of the meat offerings are grains and cakes and flours and meal. And it says very differently, when it's an animal sacrifice, it's a flesh offering. So it's somewhere along the way, of course, they merged the two together and confused the terms. So we have a lack of understanding. The powers that be.
Another thing I noticed was I gotta find it, but I noticed that God saw that it wasn't good for man to be alone, and then he brought him all the animals, and then it was like this still isn't enough. Like there was a bit of a process in him. As we were reading it today, I'm trying to find where it was at, but that's how it. Let us make man. Yeah, maybe that's further on. I might be skipping ahead of y'all.
Okay.
Well, can I, on the Genesis 9 that you were talking about, Genesis 9:3, it says every living creature, creeping things, moving things, creeping organisms, gliding things, moving things, will be food for you.
Yes.
And then the
9:3.
food means food, eating, object of devouring, consuming in fire of judgment, which I think is really interesting.
I'll pass. Did you want some banana slugs? Banana slugs with your banana peppers?
I don't have anything parasites. My peppers are blessed.
But no, just fry them up together. Little
Hey.
garlic and onion.
I don't know. Is that a forbidden food? I don't know. Is that unclean? Like
What
not
is?
slugs?
Ooh,
Bleh.
I don't know.
no.
Okay, let's go on. Let's go to chapter 2 here.
Yeah, I found. All right, so my spot, it started at 18, and I know that if you want me to wait, I will. But it just said, the Lord God said, "It's not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him."
Right.
And then he brings all the different animals, the birds, and all that. And it says in 20, but for Adam there was not found a helper fit for him after he named them all. And that's whenever, and I just thought that was interesting. I don't know. It was just the process. What I was thinking in my head is how God was like, this isn't good. But then there was, he's bringing them all these different animals, and it was probably beyond time. So Adam's sitting there watching how the animal reacts with its environment and all that. And then it was still like, this isn't enough. And then God makes Eve. And I thought that was neat.
Here's your answer. There, right there, Landon.
Jimmy.
That's funny.
All right. So,
I've never seen. Okay, I thought he said he had seen one.
oh boy. So this is kind of interesting if you studied the extra biblical books, the apocryphal books. That I'm not sure exactly which one it's in, but just as we're told, and we see right here, where man and woman were once one and then became two, and then in marriage they become one again. That partnership, somewhere it talks about Leviathan and Behemoth were one creature. And they were separated. And the Leviathan was sent into the deep of the ocean. And Behemoth was left on land. So it's kind of makes me wonder, are there other creatures like that? That used to be one creature and then were split in two? I don't know. There's no answer to it. It's just something I speculate about.
That's interesting to think about. It may have been part of the corruption, was trying to, I don't know, reblend things or.
I don't know. Possibly. What a lot of people say here too in verse 21, right? And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. So that deep sleep, they say, look, see, God put him into a medically induced coma, or he gave him anesthesia, or any other thing to support a kind of fleshy point of view.
Right. God was an anesthesiologist. I got you.
Right? Oops. Where did that go? There it is. If you look at 2, the word there, let's see. What verse was that? There. Wait, I'll find it. I will. The word for rib actually comes from a primitive root meaning a curve. And I hate to jump to science, but could that be the DNA curve? Something that they wouldn't have known? And they take this root, this word, and say, oh, a curve. Well, if it's a curve, the only thing that's curved in the body is the rib, so it must be the rib. And then also, looking at that through what we know from the scientific world, is you have men are XY, but women are two X's, XX. So did he remove, was Adam XYX, XXY? I don't know. Things I think about.
Well, something I ran across in somewhere, somebody was talking about that Adam was, what is it that you call where they're both in one, both sexes are in one body?
Both what?
Both sexes are in one body. What they have both.
Hermaphrodites?
Yeah, he was a hermaphrodite. So I know that what you said, I
Right.
understand what you're saying. Then that could lead to what maybe somebody was.
See, that's why I don't like going back to the science, because they are using that, certain belief systems are using that to push that. See, eventually we'll all be androgynous and sexless, or both sexes, not sexless, both sexes. It's one of those pit of hell teachings.
I have heard that theory though.
Who else? Anybody got anything else from chapter 2? Velcro?
He just decided, come on up here.
All right, let's go to chapter 3. What do you got? I just want to point out that this is where Casey Gonzalez pointed out in the last one. When we were reading this, she said, people want to say that food laws are unimportant, but the very fall, our initial fall, happened because they disobeyed a food law.
Right. Yeah. I saw that too.
Very good.
It's a good point.
Right?
Something else that I noticed as well. We kept getting this advertisement throughout YouTube for, to subscribe to something, you had to pay for it. Well, anyway, they gave like the first episode away for free, and it was from a Bible college, and so it's just going over Genesis, and this professor he's just kind of walking through Genesis, and he was talking about at the point where God goes, hey, where are you? And haven't I told you, or didn't I tell you not to, who told you were naked? And so Adam goes, it's her fault, instead of taking the response, like maybe I didn't tell her enough to stay away from the tree, or instead of taking responsibility for himself, he pointed at his wife. And at the same time, he was kind of pointing it back to God, but I forget the point that he was making. It was very, very interesting to be like, oh, this woman that you gave me. That's how he was shoving it back in God's face, and off on Eve. This woman that you gave me, she gave me the fruit and I ate it, and so it's her fault, but it's your fault because you gave it to me. And then she goes, well, this, the serpent tricked me. And so it was this big thing of like the blame goes to every other party but the one who made the decision. And I just thought that was a very interesting explanation of how this man was walking through, that conversation, which led to, judgment. Because we do serve a forgiving God. And had there been a sense of repentance, I think that we would live in a much different world.
Interesting thought. Well, and to go off of what you were saying, Landon, what was the serpent doing there in the first place? Was that not Adam's responsibility to protect the garden?
Right.
Right, but the serpent was just a known animal to them already.
And what was he doing talking?
They all
He
talk.
Yeah, they all talk.
They could communicate with Adam.
Yeah.
Probably talk like however Adam talked.
But we don't think about that. We don't stop and think about that they were communicating. We just sort of kind of breeze over that. And it's like, whoa, wait a second. What do you mean? She didn't even bat an eye when he started talking to her.
Right.
And we just sort of kind of gloss over that and don't think about it. It's like, oh, that's one of those parables or one of those stories. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Go back a minute.
Yeah. Go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because David Carrico has a fairly convincing study that the serpent that was in the garden was Leviathan. And he takes an hour and a half to go through this, so I'm not going to cover all of it. But he makes a convincing argument. And that Leviathan, well, it's an entity that's still out there. And other people have theories. If you look at Emily Pittsford's channel, Emily, 1921? You look at her channel, she has theories on the spirit of Leviathan affecting the waterway, right? Now people are eating all these shell creatures that we aren't supposed to be eating out of the ocean. And then you look, well, wait, where do we have the real anti-Christ, real anti-God, real anti-traditional marriage? All these different things seem to start at these places located next to water. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting, 1922. Thank you, Jimmy. Yeah. Emily, 1922.
Yeah. Well, then you think about Dagon.
Right? Dagon the fish god.
Yeah, and that's the RCC.
Right. Just because someone wearing a giant fish mouth on their head doesn't mean that they're worshiping fish gods. Okay, maybe it does. Okay. Wow, you convinced me. It didn't take any time at all. Goodness. All right.
So one thing to kind of highlight here that a little bit different. So when he talks about after they ate of the fruit and they were caught, and he's talking to Eve about how she's going to have pain in childbirth. Then he goes, your desire shall become contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. And then he goes on to Adam, says, because you listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten me, which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of it. So it's just that dynamic that he outlines the way, the structure of how society should be. And we see right now when you get the kind of this hyper feminist movement where you kind of want to take just male out of the picture, and you can see some of the damage that's happening to society because we're going against the structure in which God created things.
Right.
I mean, this is just the first example of how you go against that structure, and it causes the fall of all of mankind.
Yep.
And that's interesting, kind of. Well, you're in a much trickier position than I am at this moment, literally. That in verse 17, and to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and eaten of the tree, have eaten of the tree which I commanded you shall not eat. And let's see, how's that phrased in the King James?
It says, cursed is the ground for thy sake.
Right. It's in the King James, it says, and unto Adam he says, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife. So that kind of makes me, I was thinking about this too, talking about man and woman being one entity initially. Made me wonder about what parts were separated into what.
Well, if you go and look at the dynamics of male and female, and I posted one of a talk by a Christian. He's a psychologist and does studies on relationships between men and women and how they think and how they're just completely, their brains even function differently, you know, their thought
Right.
processes. And, you know, you've got the man, and if you think about it, you know, they are one track. They think about one thing basically at a time. And if you think about their job and their role, they've got to be able to do that, to be able to think about what they're doing, where they're going, not get distracted, protect their family, be on the alert. Whereas a woman, her brain's going a bazillion different directions all at once. She's putting a bazillion things together, and her role, she's cooking dinner, she's cleaning the house, she's watching kids, and her brain's got to be able to function that way. So you wonder, I mean, it is a split down the two dynamics of the different sexes. What if Adam could do both? It's really scary, actually, to think about that. But
Yeah.
Well, you typically get the dynamic between men and women, and this isn't always the case. But if you look at generalities, men typically are a little more structured in their approach, and women are a little more creative in their approach. And before God separated Adam and Eve, Adam was tasked with naming all of the animals, so that creativity was there. And then once they were separated, Eve was, I mean, she was called Eve because she was the mother of all living. And I mean, that's kind of that creativity. You're creating, there's that creative part, whereas Adam's job is to create, I mean, be able to provide for his family.
Once they were separated, it was go dig ditches. You go dig ditches. He's going to be barefoot and pregnant and raising youngins and cooking and cleaning.
It's sad how much things have changed because this dynamic of what roles should be is just being disregarded. I mean, I travel a lot with my job, and so I was traveling to Northern California a few weeks ago, and I was sitting next to these two women on the plane, and they got to talking about just like the role of like women in society, and it was difficult. And even whenever they were asking my opinion, which don't know why they would ask my opinion, but then I mentioned that my wife stays home with my daughter and homeschools her, and they were just like, "Why aren't you the one doing that?" I'm like, "Well, my role is to provide for my family." They're like, "Well, you didn't give your wife a choice?" I was like, "My wife willingly wants to do this." It's an interesting thing where like it's like people just completely shut off from this dynamic that God laid out.
They're all, "You're lying. You must have drugged her."
Yeah, that's kind of the way they kind of like looked at me, and it was just disheartening to say the least.
You know, it's interesting too because there's we see you can find hundreds, if not thousands, of testimonies of people where both people worked in like high finance, both members of the couple worked in like high finance or industry or whatever, and they could never get ahead. Each one of them is making like 6 figures, and they were constantly in debt, and they could never get to all the appointments, and they could never be at their kids' events and everything. And finally they said, enough's enough. And then the husband goes into like carpentry, or machining or something, some trade related field. And the wife stays home with the kids, and they cram 5 kids in a little 3-bedroom house with themselves. And they're like, we've never been happier. We don't have debt anymore. All the bills are paid. We're making 1/10 of what we used to, and everything's perfect.
Yeah, the Audi ain't worth what you pay for, and emotional damages.
And we can verify that just firsthand. Like, we both worked full-time jobs even after Olivia was born, and then at some point Ashley was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm missing my daughter's life. I want to stay home. We cut our income in half, but while we both had jobs, we had credit card debt, we had all these debts, and I can tell you right now, we're out of credit card debt. We don't have, the only debt we have, I guess, is our mortgage. So and we're working on paying that off quickly. We refinanced to pay that off. And it's funny because we make half the money we used to make, but because of our view on life and our view on what is required of life to be happy has changed so much. We just have settled into the roles that God put us when it came to our family, and we're so much happier because of it.
The blessings flow.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that from so many different people. I was on church staff years and years ago, and they made that decision, the same decision of, and the Father honors that. And, you end up with blessings like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We were actually talking about it the other day, just how much of a rat race it was before she quit her job, and how we every year tax time came, and we use our taxes to try to get ourselves caught up on our credit card debt. And it's like, we haven't had to worry about that in a really long time. And it's just such a blessing because it's a change in how we operate.
It is. And I can testify to that too, because we went through that, and it wasn't easy, but you get out of it and do things the way that we were meant to. Even once you get into the law, he says, don't partake in usury. You don't charge a brother usury, and you don't take usury, right? Which means a loan to where you're paying interest. Mm-hmm. And they've changed the definition now, because it used to be any interest. Now they're saying, well, just really high rates of interest. No, it says not to take any of it, because it's a curse. It's one of those things, you can't magically turn, 3 ounces of gold into 3.5.
Let me ask you your opinion. Let's say you purchase something, and but then you just want to sell it, and there's no real value, to it. Like for instance, maybe this is a strange, but let's say you're picking website names, right? Everybody can do that, and then you go to, is that usury to sell that at a higher than what you paid for? Because it's not a loan. I'm not talking about loans, but I'm just curious, would that still be considered usury?
You mean selling something for less than what you paid for it?
For more than what you paid for it,
Well, I think that is all market bearing type stuff.
Just making sure. Excuse me.
Supply and demand. There was in reality, say there was no interest. We lived in a world of an unchanging value of our dollar, or any money, right? Well, what's something worth? It's worth whatever you're willing to pay for it, right? But when you tack interest on it, golly, if you've ever gotten a house loan, when you sign it and they get to that part where you have to initial it, where it says if you take it to the full 30 years of the loan, then it's not going to be $100,000 house. It's going to be a $195,000 house. It's like, what? I'm not going to see that back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And even if your house is paid off, everybody pay attention. Even if your house is paid off, try not paying your property taxes. See how long you have that house,
Yeah.
right?
That was something that I brought up when I sold my condo several months ago. I was sitting with the signing papers with the title company, and I brought that very thing up. And I said, "You don't own your house." And she said, "What are you talking about?" "Yes, we do." And I said, "What happens if you don't pay your property tax?" "Well, they gave us a charter." And I'm like, "What happens if you don't pay your property tax?" "You don't own your house because they will come get your house."
Yeah.
If you don't pay your
Pay the
tax.
tax, they'll seize your house. There's people that make money paying back taxes and taking that seized property
Mm-hmm.
and then selling it. So, okay, I don't know how we.
Yeah.
So let's go to chapter 4. There, which is Cain killing Abel. There's a little bit in this one too, huh?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the offerings. The offerings were different. Were they wrong? Was Cain wrong? Or was it just his attitude that he brought?
That he bought bad food. You know, I did a study on that a real long time ago about the fruit of the ground, and everybody always says, what's the kind of fruit you get from the ground? It's vegetables. But if you do a big study on it, I think there's an argument to be made that it could be jewelry, precious stones. And, you know, it's kind of that whole thing, you know, when you get a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old child and they're sitting on the ground playing, what do? They offer you a rock, right? Here's your pretty rock. Here's a pretty rock for you. You know, and it wasn't any sacrifice of theirs at all? No, not really. I mean, if you're giving up the best sheep in your flock, even if you're not slaughtering it, that's a sacrifice. You're losing out on wool and, you know, keeping your field gleaned and cleaned, etc. But that was just something interesting. Maybe I'll do a video on it. They irritate all kinds of people. That is interesting, though. And in that same vein, that's also for a while, but I was thinking the mark put upon Cain was one of these gems that he had cut. Okay, fine. Here, take this. Right? And everywhere you go, ooh, pretty. Nothing? Okay, come on. Somebody's got to have something.
I actually have a question, or not really a question, just pointing it out. God refers to sin lying at the door as being him.
Do it.
Chapter 7. I mean, verse 7, sorry. Sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. I thought that was interesting.
This is contrary to you. You must be over it.
Yep, it is. And I think that is something for all of us, right?
Like being our old man.
Right. Well, any transgression can lie at the door. And of course, this is also after the original sin of Adam's fall.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways. Yep, it lieth at the door. So what is that? crouching at the door.
Hmm.
And in the Strongs, it says to stretch oneself out, lie stretched out, to cause to lie down or laying like stones. I wonder how that relates to a stumbling block.
Right.
Because if you lie down, if you stretch out something, that's something you're going to trip over.
Something you can trip over, definitely.
Right.
Hmm.
Just a thought. And then I think the other thing that keeps coming back to me when I read this is the voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. So if
Okay.
it says life is in the blood, can he actually hear the blood? Can the father actually hear that blood crying out?
I think so. We're taught to think of everything physically, but it's. I think it means so much more in the spirit realm that we just don't have any concept of. Because blood is, like you said, life is in the blood. Blood is used for a sacrifice. I've even seen a study. These people were using science, but they were trying to show DNA, where they had done a study on like these different murderers, and they all had different marks in their DNA, and it was all different races, and so it seems to me like God, like I think it's pretty literal the way that it says his blood's crying out to him.
And then I think the other thing that,
Interesting. Go ahead.
no, the other thing that, I'm sorry, Landon, because I think that that's probably true. The other thing that has jumped out at me just in the last year is they were already doing sacrifices. So the law was already established. We think of the law being established with Moses, but it was already established.
And that's something that keeps popping up too in the apocryphal books, right? That law was given to Adam, who handed it down, who handed it down, who handed it down, and that Abraham was a teacher of the law to all the nations, and so that's interesting. If there was no law, though, how can there be sin?
Right.
If sin is transgression of the law.
And then didn't, in the extra biblical text, didn't Abraham go spend time with Shem once he came out of Ur? Didn't he go spend time with Shem to learn the law of Yahuwah?
I don't know.
All right, let's go on to 5. These are the genealogies here. Specifically, Cain's genealogy, right? That it starts off with. Or no, it lifts that at the end of, chapter 4. So back to chapter 4 for a moment. That is, I find it interesting that we have in Cain's lineage music makers and workers of metal. But then we see later, I mean, does that mean just because they were descended of Cain that they were bad, evil people? I mean, there's a reason that his lineage is provided there. And it's separated from Adam's lineage.
I would think because the sins of the father go, passed on to the 3rd and 4th generation, or the iniquities at least, that you're possibly more likely to be murdered in that tribe. But I don't know if they were all necessarily bad people.
I just wonder because I mean the music making and the metalworking is something that we see our Father put to big use when he's having the Israelites build the tabernacle and the temple.
Yeah.
And there are people out there that say anything that came from the lineage of Cain is evil and we're not supposed to have anything to do with it.
Yeah. That's how racism starts.
Yes, there's that too. No, I'm of Israel. You're the seed of Cain. No, you're the seed of Cain. No, I'm Israel. Oh, yeah, well, I'm rubber, you're glue.
But God protected him too.
Hey, it rhymes with glue. Okay. Yes, God protected him too. That's right.
Yeah, I do think that if everything that comes from his line is evil, God wouldn't have protected him, and said anyone that's going to raise a hand on him is going to be cursed sevenfold. I mean, it just doesn't seem to make sense if that were the case.
Right. Okay, so chapter 5 now. Anybody got anything?
Did Lamech die in the flood?
I'm sorry?
Lamech?
In the flood?
Yeah, that's Noah's dad.
I don't know. It says he lived 595 years
Right.
after begatting Noah at 182 years. So no, because he couldn't have died in the flood because the flood happened when Noah was 600?
Ah.
500.
500. Sorry.
No, so Noah was 500 when he fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Oh, yeah, I think it was.
Lamech was 182 when he fathered Noah. So that would put Lamech at 682, and Lamech died at 777, so just over 100 years.
Yeah, I think he died at 600, or I think the flood happened in Moses 600.
Yeah, you're right.
There, let's see here.
Where was it that somebody, or what am I thinking of? Somebody told me that those that were, because Abba didn't bring the flood until Methuselah died.
Yes.
And it was like 1 week later.
It's in chapter 7, verse 6. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of the waters was upon the earth.
Yeah, so Lamech would be dead by then.
Yeah,
Mhm.
he was gone. Has anybody seen that study that Skiba does where he takes all the names of the people from Adam to Noah?
Mhm.
Yeah, I was looking at that.
I didn't get it prepared, so if somebody has it, go ahead.
Oh.
If not, we'll just go to 6.
Yeah, I don't know all the meanings. I think Methuselah meaning something like when he dies, the flood comes. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. I know that. But that's all I remember, really.
This is something I wanted to point out. I point it out every chance I get. But so often today, we get so many people that blame everything on, oh, it's a demon. Oh, it's an evil spirit, or it's this, it's that. But why did, we're told why the flood happened in verse 5 of chapter 6. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. It doesn't say, I destroyed the earth because fallen angels came down and came unto the daughters of women, and demons were possessing everybody, and doesn't say that.
It's because man was wicked.
Because man was wicked. Because man had an evil heart continually.
It's true. I think it comes down to, we were talking about this, through early on, the just taking responsibility.
Right.
Like I think it's just nature within us to want to pass off responsibility onto something else. So
Right.
we look like, why would God wipe out man? Well, because the Nephilim were coming down, and I mean, it was just no, man was wicked.
Right.
We were wrong.
Well, we see that passing the buck from the very first guy, right? From Adam. Did you eat of the fruit I told you not to eat? Well, she gave it to me.
Yeah.
Right? You buck passer.
So you were asking about the names, the meaning of the names
Yes.
from Adam to Noah.
Yep. Did you find it?
So, yep. It says, man was appointed to death, sorrowful from the presence of God. One comes down dedicated, dying he shall send to the poor and lowly rest and comfort.
Mhm.
Of course, that's without Cain being in there.
Right. No, it's Kenan, Enosh Kenan, Mahalalel Jared. Then Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah.
Very interesting. All right. Let's go to Isaiah. 42.
No, wait.
Where is it? Oh, there it is. Starting at verse 5. And you notice they try to keep these kind of fluid with what the first part was. There's a lot in this too.
Yep.
What was that? 42:5 through 43:10.
Real quick before we jump into that, you got something from 6 that
Okay.
this is here for, from Genesis 6. You tell me if I'm completely off or this just sounds wacko crazy, but
Okay.
so Moses wrote these books. Moses was, a studied Egyptian. You go to verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into daughters of man, and they were bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And so this is just, again, me kind of thinking things through. So he was a studied Egyptian. Egyptian had their gods that they worshipped. At some point, do you think those gods they worshipped were stories that were told of the Nephilim before the time of the flood? These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown.
Right.
Well,
I think that they were, well, if you look at that, I mean, it goes into, what is it? The words. Let's see here.
And the reason I bring that up is, I mean, if you look at Egyptian gods, you look at Norse mythology, you look at, Greek mythology, there's so many similarities in the gods of these mythology.
Right.
A perversion of people taking old stories of the Nephilim that had been passed down and somehow turn them into gods they worship.
Right. That the giants, Nephilim, fallen ones, a feller that is a bully or a tyrant properly, and then they get giant out of that. So it might be kind of how we use like the term giants of industry.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe there were physical giants, though.
Yeah.
This is what I think of it, because of the way, like if you look in the way Michael Heiser will explain it, back then in the culture, they believed like, okay, so there were 72 different nations, and there were different entities appointed to different nations. Back then, you built a temple because you wanted your God to come to you. You wanted the God to dwell in that place. And the Egyptians had a bunch of different idols, but I think that maybe they could have had some interactions with some things that they were paying homage to and worship. So, I mean, it could possibly have just been Nephilim, or it could have been some of the fallen entities. I don't know, but it does make me think about that, and especially in movies and in some of the culture, like you'll see it hidden if you're just watching something for entertainment, and it kind of jumps out at you, like they threw that in there. It's just weird. It's weird. So that's what I think of it.
Yep.
Anything from Isaiah 42?
I had a couple of different things. Oh, echo. The first one I had was in 8. It says in the ESV, it says, "I am the Lord, that is my name." So, in all of our modern things from, KJV, the name, Yahuwah, Yahweh, Jehovah, however you want to pronounce it, all of that was replaced with the uppercase Lord. So it's hiding the name. So he says this is my name. And then, he later on he says, "Call upon my name." Well, how can you call upon his name if you don't know it? Or you don't know how to pronounce it?
Right.
Because it's been hidden.
Well, that didn't work.
Well, it's like my name, Jonathan, but in German, Johann, but in Spanish, Juanito. Right? All the same person.
But the word Lord is not the name.
Right. No, I agree with that.
It's a title. Well, actually, the uppercase is actually a replacement for the name.
Right. No, and that's well known. I mean, they tried to hide that, right, with the Masoretic text,
Mm-hmm.
with the taking, Hebrew and throwing the little accent marks and diphthongs on there, where there had been none before. And also, too, not just that, but what people call the modern Hebrew alphabet, they brought that out of Babylon. They don't call it the Babylonian alphabet, though. So, interesting the way they do that. They, them, them, the powers that be.
Well, the other thing that I saw was in 20. It says, "His ears are open, but he does not hear." And I think of, I spent 30 years in a church. My ears were open, but I couldn't hear.
Right.
My eyes were open, but I was blind.
Yep. Howdy, JJ.
Can I tell you my take on that? And it kind of gets a bit. It's very unique to my life, but I can't deny because I've had enough experiences. where people were interacting with something that I could kind of see a dark shadow, and I had a really, really like sick to my stomach feeling every time. But I mean, time and time again, people interacting with something else that it wasn't really there. But I know that they weren't crazy. They were messing with something. And so when I hear, you know, the who is blind but my servant, or deaf as my messenger whom I send, and time again, or even in 43, whenever he said, um, I'm trying to find where it's at, but he talks about open your eyes and let your ears hear. It makes me think of that because I've had these experiences so much, not as of late, but when I wasn't living my life right. And I also know that I invited those things into my life because of sin and rejecting God. But in the midst of all that, as he was kind of pulling me out of it, he allowed me to see things that most of us don't even know are there. Like a physical sense of others interacting with some other form of spirit, and it was never a good thing. And so I just when I think about the blindness and deaf or can't hear, it makes me think of that, because the way that some of these individuals acted, it was as if they were the ones who could see, and it was the good thing, and they were happy that whatever that was there. It just, I don't know. That's what it makes me think of. I know it's very unique, but I consider it to be a part of the veil as to why we're not supposed to see some of those things. But that's where my head went while reading through this, because of my experiences that I've had. I don't want to confuse anybody. Sorry.
No, I get what you're saying. I understand that. Yeah.
All right. What about from chapter 43 of Isaiah? We only had those 10 verses. What?
Number 8 was the one I was referencing. I just couldn't find it. Bring out the people who are blind yet have eyes, who are deaf yet have ears.
I just think it's really exciting and comforting how possessive he is of us, and just how nothing's going to keep us from him. Even though we're the far corners of the earth, he's going to make sure that he gathers us to himself.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Well,
I
I think what you're saying, Ashley, is that, you know, he's got the house of Israel scattered to the four corners of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, exactly what you're saying, though, he protects us. But then at some point, he's going to call us all back out.
Mm-hmm.
And that our eyes that were blind are open, and our ears that were closed can hear. And you think about everybody that's waking up right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like verse 8 is really interesting. It says, "Bring forth the blind people that have eyes, and the deaf that have ears." Mm-hmm. Really cool.
Living awesome times. Okay, let's go to John chapter 1. I know you've been waiting for this. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So there's a lot of contention with this.
Mm-hmm. Like maybe that Jesus was a created being or that he was God.
All sorts. There's right? Just in that first verse, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God.
Right. He's always there. It's called the elect one or the hidden in the beginning.
Right?
But he had to have already existed if he created all things.
If all things were created by him. Yep. Made by him, and nothing was made without him.
What was it? I forgot. I was watching a video this morning and it was talking about, he was the creator. His word created everything. And while he was hanging on the cross, dying, he was still holding the universe together. Because he was the creation. Or, he created everything. So his being was still holding everything together while he was there. I thought that was like, whoa, didn't think about that.
Interesting. The rock split open.
Mm-hmm.
I personally think that's when time started.
When?
Interesting.
Not in the sense of like the beginning of all things at the cross, but I think the countdown for all of darkness and evil to understand what had happened was on the cross, and that time when both directions, all the way back to the beginning. I mean, I see it as, I don't know, it makes more sense in my head, but the enemy thinking that they're doing the thing, making him suffer, that it's like that's their, and then once he dies and they understand what all of that actually meant, that's when the clock started ticking for him to try and destroy, to do everything that they could to really, war against God. And that, but the death on the cross not only affected everything after that, it affected things before that, so when I say the beginning of time, I don't mean like creation. I just mean like it went in all directions.
You're saying the countdown to the end started.
Right.
So one thing that I'm seeing in this, and I don't know, I'm kind of putting things together, but so in verse 4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And then you go to Genesis chapter 1 and talks about, in the beginning there was light. He created light, separated light from darkness. It almost kind of thinks like before then, like this is kind of the finality of life. This is when time kind of sort of began. Because before that, was there life, was there death, or was everything just kind of there? And so you create light, and that is the life that now has, and then you flip out of that, death is darkness. And just a thought.
I was also thinking about in the first part, God being a spirit and he was hovering over the waters, and it seems like water was already there. And it talks about actually John chapter 3. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. I wonder if that kind of ties together too.
Interesting.
going through this, just comparing ESV to the King James.
The light that was separated at the beginning before even the sun, moon, and stars.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that's like a spiritual light. Because I don't know, but. And was this I'd also wonder, God created the heaven and the earth. Heaven is his throne and the earth is his footstool. Is this a light that's in heaven? That we don't
Or
know.
is it the light that shines everywhere?
Mhm.
Might not even be light the way that we think of it. Like,
That's what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
like
Like a
light is,
visual light?
you know how we are, like, especially in the judgment, like we stand naked before God. It doesn't necessarily mean like physically. It just means like him knowing the intentions, all your thoughts, everything, ins and outs. You're feeling like you're
Mhm.
naked before the Father. And so the light might be a part of that exposure, but not in but a pure exposure, not like when we think of exposure, if it's not in film, it's like, oh, this person was exposed or whatever, but it's like a positive, a truth. So that could be what it the meaning of it.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, and that's what I meant when in verse 4 it says, "In him was life, and life was the light of men." It's almost a kind of finality of who we are, of as God created life, and life is kind of the amalgamation of kind of all of our conscious thoughts and the actions we have, and as we stand before God, that light, that life is kind of exposed.
Right.
Where is it that talks about, it says that the darkness could not perceive the light?
Right. It doesn't even
It
understand it.
doesn't understand it. And so I'm wondering, if that's what's in our fallen state, that we can't perceive.
Verses 4 and 5.
Is that where that is?
In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not.
Right. And it talks about, it also talks about the angels didn't even understand what Jesus was doing, or the whole thing, until he was on the cross and had been resurrected. That they didn't even perceive or understand.
Right. Excuse me.
So,
in verse 12, but as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name. Which brings us back, loops us back around to where you were, Donna. What's his name?
Right.
Pronounce it correctly.
There's a difference between pronouncing it correctly and not even knowing it.
Right? Goes back to Zephaniah 3:9. For then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord, to serve him with one consent.
So is that what you're referring to when you say that you believe that at some point we will all know the pure original language that the Father provided?
I don't know if it'll be the original language, but we'll all be speaking a pure language, yeah.
Do you think that was what everybody, well, it says, everybody was speaking one language at Babel. And do you think when it was split that was removed, that language was removed?
Yes.
The original pure Hebrew.
Yes, I do, because it says, let us go down and confound their language. So I think that the one language on earth might not have even been the same language that they speak in heaven.
Yeah.
But either way, it was confounded.
And I would think that if you're going to dwell in the presence of the Father, it would naturally be a language of intention, just because of that whole light and the understanding of. So what I mean by that is not so much the words that you use or the sounds, but a language with an understanding of the intention of the speaker, just because of you see what I'm saying? It's like the person listening or having the conversation would understand exactly what the person is meaning to say. It's just how I put it together in my head. I didn't hit it.
No, and that goes to something I was thinking about when you were talking about that is, this effort to learn the Hebrew and learn how to say the Father's name properly. If that's not an effort to skirt or go around, try to revive something that the Father didn't intend for it to be revived yet.
Well, I think it's a kind of a fruitless errand, a fruitless mission to do that, because it's right. People are learning Hebrew, which was a dead language, right? Nobody was speaking it, and it's like learning Italian so you can understand Latin. It's not going to work that way. And I've had a couple of years of Latin, and the Latin that is used now for the medical community and legal purposes and scientific purposes, they bungled it all up. Took 2 years of it in high school, taught at a public school by a former Jesuit priest, right? Let's keep everything hidden and this and that. And we beat out the state colleges, their law school, their medical schools that were sending people to these Latin conventions. We beat them out because we were pronouncing it this way that it was spoken allegedly in Rome, by Kaiser, their ruler. And, to say that you're going to learn Hebrew and pronounce the names correctly, no. Call me skeptical. Ain't gonna happen. But keep on trying. More power to you. And I think Zach Bauer has a good video on that too, about everybody learning and speaking Hebrew. It's kind of like taking someone from California and putting them in Boston. Or Louisiana, right by New Orleans.
Landon's going, don't diss my state.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about a lot of the rules that were set up for the English language. A lot of that was done to differentiate or to separate the peasants from the elite class.
Right.
Because if you spoke proper English, it kept people from learning, and it also did this class separation. And so in some ways, I see that as the same thing of, well, we've got to learn this and we've got to learn it the proper way and we've got to be able to speak it. Well, when you do that, you leave a group of people out that aren't going to be able to do that, or can't, or don't have the resources or the ability to do that. But what does Scripture say? He taught the simple. Jesus taught the simple people, not the learned class, because they had a heart to learn, not because they had all this head knowledge.
Right.
That probably made no sense.
No, I get that.
Borrowing.
I speak Southern.
The first thing people like sound off on when they want you to listen to what like their judgment call on an important matter is the degree that they have, or it's like this is how much I am a part of the world. I have a doctrine, and now you want that when you're going to get brain surgery or something like that. I get it, but when it's like in an opinionated like discussion, it's like, well, this is so and so, and they've done this, and they've done this, and you know what I mean. So I kind of get where there's a bit of maybe I know indoctrination is there, but maybe that's not the right word I'm looking for. But it's like the worldly success is what validates me, for my opinion, to be held to a higher standard than the unlearned, and that it hadn't really changed.
Oh, goodness. All right.
Either Vitali is bored or he has completely digressed.
Right. Well, I'm pretty much digressing too. So I think we'll wrap it up. Let's pray out. Thank you, Father, for this opportunity to fellowship with one another and study your word. We thank you very much for that. We ask that you bless everybody here today and that joins us in the future for this study, this reading. And just remind us, we're all learning and we're all brothers and sisters. And we thank you for that. We love you in Jesus Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you very much, Lynn and Landon and Ashley and Colby and Donna. I'm reading you off as I see you on the screen. Okay. So tune in next time for a fascinating study session. And I don't think it's as long next week, but we'll still cover it regardless. At any rate, thank you, everybody. Love you all.
Bye.
Bye.